Hello, everyone. Good morning. Hello. It's wonderful to see you this nice first day of March. Yeah, first day of Adar. Can't go wrong. Uh, so this morning, going to engage with words of Torah, looking at our portion from the book of Exodus, chapter 25. We're going to focus on the first 8 verses, and you have those on your handout. And if you want to follow along with in Eitz Chaim, it would be Exodus chapter 25, beginning with verse 1, and our Torah portion is called Teruma. We'll talk about that too. The blessing for engaging with words of Torah, La'asok b'divrei Torah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. You have made us holy with your sacred responsibilities and have enjoined us to engage with words of Torah. And my first question is, am I speaking too loudly? At all? No. Okay. I need you to speak louder. Okay, so the focus today will be talking about creating sacred space. And when we last left Moses, Moses had in the book of Exodus, we've had the experience of God at Sinai and entering into this sacred covenant with God. And the people have experienced God. Moses is really speaking panim al panim, face to face with God. And after the 10 commandments are given, then Moses goes down the mountain, Moses goes back up the mountain. Last week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, there were 53, count them, mitzvot, commandments that were given in that portion. And at the end of that portion, Moses goes down and then he comes to confirm with the people. There is an experience of confirmation, and then Moses walks up into the mountain. The mountain is all aflame and with smoke, and there's thunder, and he walks up to continue this conversation with God. I say this because can you imagine having gone through what the children of Israel have gone through to be in Egypt, to leave Egypt, to stand and have this theophany, this experience of God, and to have their leader basically go up into a smoking mountain, and what happens to him? The text says that he's gone. The text says that he will be gone for 40 days and 40 nights. Bible talk for a long time. We've heard that before. But the thing is that we know that, but the children of Israel do not know that. Pardon me. So well, now in our portion this week and next, as Moses is receiving instructions, blueprints, if you will, a shopping list, if you will, for building a sanctuary, a space for God so that God can dwell among the people, and we'll talk about that for sure. But he's having this conversation with God, and the people are looking at their watches. They're wondering what happened to Moses, where is he? And I say this mostly as an introduction for 2 weeks from now, when we have the Torah portion of Kitisa, where the people get antsy and wonder what has happened to that man Moses, okay? So we should know that in the meantime, this is what is happening to that man Moses, and these instructions are being given. The commentators suggest, that is it possible that maybe Kitisa happens first, and then or the golden calf happens first, and then these instructions are given. Or in the midst of them being given, while God is talking about building a place where God could dwell among the people, meanwhile, the people are doing their own thing in order to have God and their leader dwell among them. It's possible, it's hard, we don't know. And the way the Torah is written, it could be, we're talking about instructions, then the golden calf, and then now let's put it into play, or, or another time frame, right? Another sequence of events. But for our purposes this morning, God is talking to Moses, and God says, so let's start. Why don't you read for us the first paragraph here, okay?
The Lord spoke to Moses saying, tell the Israelite people, this is where he wants,
Yes.
to bring me. Actually, that's a bad translation.
Translate it for us, Rob.
To tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moved him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting, for the ephod, and for the breastplate. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them.
Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about that word that's translated as gifts.
No, that wasn't the word I was.
Oh, okay.
It's the bring rather than.
Take, yes, that's true, and it should say take, because we're gonna talk about that later too. So the piece here that we're gonna start with to focus on is the verse 8, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Ba'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Okay, and so the first source here is from Judah Halevi, who was a Spanish Jewish physician, a poet, a philosopher. He's famous for saying, my heart is in the east, but I am in the west. And his longing to get to Jerusalem, to get to the land of Israel, which ultimately he does get there. He leaves his family, his wife and his children. He boards a boat. He gets to the land of Israel, and he doesn't live much longer than that, very sadly. But he's an amazing medieval Jewish poet and writes beautiful pieces. And actually, this is one of my favorite poems of his that we'll read in translation. I put the whole thing here because it talks about the question really before us. Well, let me ask you to be Rashi's. Okay, so the thing is, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So what does that mean to you? And is it possible to build a sanctuary that can hold God's presence?
No.
The
Yes.
sanctuary is something that's visual, that's tangible, and different people may relate differently to the same images, the same physical space. I think to some it's more important than others.
Okay, great, thank you, thanks. Okay.
With great hindsight, the answer is yes. I mean, they built it. God dwelt amongst them, and
Here we are.
Here we are. So, looking forward at it to imagine that happening is unclear, but that's why we've got one of the longest a third of Exodus is about building this kind of, right? And so,
That's right.
So, we couldn't envision it at that point, but as we look back, it worked
Sure.
for a while.
Sure. So, yes.
I was gonna say, tying it back into Keith's, the idea of something concrete. It shouldn't be a golden calf, but it should be something, I guess, this thing. Otherwise, you're experiencing God. You can't have a theophany every day and survive. One can't look upon God and live, however you want to view it. something of this world is needed to concretize and carry on the experience beyond the miracle.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And yes, I'm sorry, someone was raising.
Ivan,
Ivan.
yes. Okay, so we have this line, take me a donation from every man as his heart may urge him. So this is something that people feel deeply in their heart. They have already internalized a kind of love and affection for God. So, it's not simply about God's presence in the sanctuary, but God's presence in that is internalized by people.
It's a sanctuary.
Very true, very true.
I have
Thank
a
you.
comment also after
But,
Nelson.
but they're also living in a culture where there are people who have concrete things that they can look to as a god. And they feel that they're missing something. And they want something tangible.
Right, and that's going to be, you're right, Jackie, that's going to be expressed in 2 weeks. And I love how you're using the word concrete example, because when you look at this beautiful building that we are in, right, where does that term come from? It's a concrete example of a mishkan, of a special holy dwelling place for God. And Nelson, your hand is up.
Yes. It seems to me that we're being too concrete about it. What we need is something to focus our intuitions about, our spirit. We don't need a physical representation of God. We just need a place to focus. In that sense, a holy place. I've been in Buddhist temples that just feel holy. Personally, BJ building doesn't do too much for me, but
Sure, thank you. And yes,
Right. I was gonna talk about the other half of the sentence. Every person whose heart moves them. I was gonna say that a lot of synagogues and probably a lot of other organizations have found that they actually take in more revenue by not having a fixed dues. Than making it all voluntary. And I know the synagogue here talked about it a few years ago. I don't know what happened to that idea.
We were a little frightened, so we're somewhere halfway in between. People give a lot of money, some people give less than dues. It's still essentially a similar model, but the dues are still there out of fear.
Chabad uses that model
Yes, yeah.
quite effectively.
Why does that matter?
have.
One
here
thing I
and
noticed, I've been in homes of Buddhists, I guess. Maybe they have a little altar in the middle of the living room or some room, which I guess they devote to, that's their idol or whatever, but it's something concrete that reminds them who they are, what their religion is, and things like that, and they can pray to. And essentially, we don't have that as Jews. We have articles, we have the tefillin, we have the candlesticks, but we don't have in our home, we don't have a little altar or something that represents
A dedicated space.
Yeah, we don't have it's like the whole house, especially the kitchen. The kitchen is probably the kitchen and dining room are probably the closest.
Right, the altar is,
It's a dining table.
sorry, the
Yeah,
our dining table is considered our altar, right? For
yeah, well, we say that. We consider it for the
exactly.
bread, but the point, it is important to have something to direct your focus on.
yes,
You can't,
that's
you
very true.
cannot, I mean, you know it with kids. And we just need something concrete.
Yeah, thank you, thanks, yes.
I feel the opposite. I feel God's presence in many, many places. And sometimes just through an action or, I remember when her son was getting married and 5 minutes before, our daughter came up to me and said, see the bima with the, chuppah? Did you know the Shekinah rests on that during the wedding? And of course, I was crying already. You know, for me, that's what God's presence is. That's, you know, putting on a tallis, just through sadness, through joy. That's what I do. Thank you.
Keep that thought. Keep that thought.
Yes,
Yes.
one of the first things I look at for when I enter a new shul is the ark, the Torah. How much decoration is there around that? To me, that's the central focus. I wouldn't call it an idol, but a central focus for me.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. I want to continue on with that. I want to share an experience with you that I had that was that happened many, many years ago. And for me, it felt like an experience of God's presence in the sanctuary. For our High Holy Day services, many, many years ago, I was the choir director for the High Holy Day Choir. And when we had an earlier service, I was asked to be the cantorial soloist. So I did that. And I will always, and this was before I started wearing a talit. And I stood in front of the ark next to the rabbi, who was, at that point in time, we were preparing to sing Avinu Malkeinu. And the ark doors were opened. Everyone was invited to rise. And I started to sing. And with my back to the congregation, I could, on the one hand, I would say I could hear them singing. But on the other hand, I could say I could feel them singing. And their sound wrapped around me as if I were wearing a talit. I will never forget that experience because it felt so tremendous and so beautiful.
Mhm.
And to this day, when I put on my talit, I feel that
Yeah.
again and again and again. Rabbi Judah Halevi has this experience of not who needs this, the sanctuary is nice, but look at all these other amazing places to find God. So let's, and for our purposes this morning, because God bless us, we do move time. I want you to take a look at the bolded verses, the bolded sections, okay? It begins with, "O Lord, where shall I find thee? All hidden and exalted is thy place. And where shall I not find thee? Full of thy glory is the infinite space." And if you turn to the next page, at the top of the second page there. "But thy presence, Lord, with my whole heart did I call and pray. And going out toward thee, I found thee coming to me on the way." I love this. It's just so beautiful. And what I love about it is that it takes two to experience God's presence, if not 600,001, right? But it takes, we're part of that experience. It doesn't say, and sitting like a lump on a bog or a bump on a log, and found you coming towards me. It doesn't say that, right? Judah Halevi says, and with my whole heart did I call and pray. So there's this reaching out for God and going out toward thee, not just sitting and waiting, but going out there, right? And being there, being present. I found you coming toward me. It's just so beautiful. And think about experiences that you've had. And has that, to think about, has that been the case? Right? Especially at liminal moments like weddings, right? And births and death and special birthday parties, right?
But I myself find it in sometimes simplest every day. Just a very strong feeling of God's presence.
And that's beautiful.
And sometimes it brings me to tears. Larry and I are blessed. We have 5 grandchildren in town. And many times we get them individually. And even just yesterday, our 3-year-old, there's no words. We just look at each other and they're like these little holy moments.
Holy moments, exactly. Exactly, yes.
So I very much appreciate what Levi says, but I think what we read in verse 8 is almost the opposite of it. With 1,000 years later, it's us having to approach God. I'm reading in 8 that God learned along the way that he has to approach the people in a way that he had not before. I mean, these are slaves. Their idea of Judaism is patriarchal. Oh, God spoke with them. And then their next vision of God was God speaking to the Pharaoh and doing these big things. And it's like, God learned that maybe he needs to be a little more personal for these individuals and come and dwell with them. And of course, building the Mishkan is going to be a way for them to connect. But I don't see them walking, saying, hey, why don't we do something to walk closer? It's God saying, I need you to build this, but I'm telling you to do it. In fact, I'm telling Moshe to tell you to do it. So there's even a remote. So I think God's learned that lesson, and later we learned the lesson back.
Sure, that's very true. And there will be something that we will read that will speak to that. So there's a lot to be said for just taking the text as it is, written at a certain time, speaking about something specific. But then there's the commentary and thinking about, so what is it that will help us, as you beautifully said, walk with God, right? And part of that is just the process of making the donations, of moving one's heart, right? To give, to help make this sanctuary a possibility. And then there's also the day-to-day experiences and the mitzvot, the commandments. When we respect our parents, when we, love our children, and I'm sure that mitzvah is written there somewhere in the 613, right? When we teach them well, right? When we teach them diligently, and when you have your 3-year-old grandchild and share your love of them as they share their love of you, that's you're teaching them, right? How to grandparent and how beautiful that is and what a mitzvah that is. So there are so many ways that can connect us to these holy moments, right? These little sparks of blessings.
What we're doing,
yes, Sheila.
what we're basically doing, God is, he's like a therapist or a how-to. This is a how-to book, how to serve him, how to serve each other. If you think about it, that's what it's a how-to book.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Torah is a how-to book.
Oh, a how-to book, yes.
Yeah, God is, he's being more than a therapist because he is giving the ideas to the people, what to
Yes.
do. And it's almost like, well, we know that this is that the Jewish people were in the context. I mean, they really didn't know what was going on around them, except perhaps in Egypt. The other civilizations, and God's making them aware. Hey, you can't do these things. The others do it, but it's mitunish. It's not nice.
Correct, right,
And he's telling them how to do it the proper way,
right,
or the way he wants. Let's put it this way.
sure, right,
The
the
way he
Jewish, right,
And,
for sure.
as a point of fact that we survived and they didn't, so that obviously something must have been right.
For sure. Let's look at number 3, okay? Rabbi Isaac Abarbanel from 15th century Spain and his commentary. And Harry, want to read that one?
Sure. Why did God command the erection of the tabernacle? When God said that I may dwell among them, as if God were an object demarcated and limited in space, which is the opposite of the truth. After all, God himself spoke these words through the prophet Isaiah. The heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house can you build for me?
So thank you. What is Rabbi Abarbanel, what's his question?
How can we contain God?
Can you really contain God? Can you, build a building, a tent structure that's going to actually, house God? Yes.
That's why it seems to me that with or without a physical representation like a Mishkan or a synagogue in our days, it's really only and only just a matter of internal faith that one has, or one has more, or one has less, and so on and so forth.
For sure. I think as time has come by, and perhaps God realizes this too, you're going to need a place to get together. You're going to need a place to come together as a community. And that's what this is going to provide for you. Yes.
So in that sense, it's, the question, it contains a false dichotomy because we're not actually limiting God in any way, but we are limited. So as we've often said about our prayer services, it's not that God really needs these, we need these.
For sure.
And one needs a sense, how can you give something to the one that has everything? Because if you have something to give, your time, your prayers, your tzedakah, whatever it may be, that's the only way you could express that, if you will, loyalty, praise, thanks, ask, whatever it may be. Because we're limited.
For sure. And we will also read that as, in the process of giving, the person, that who receives is not the only one that gets benefit, but we get benefit too.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Is that Ivan?
Yeah. Okay, so, God is everywhere. God is everywhere, and that God has to leave space for us. And so there's a concept, tzimtzum, right, where God shrinks himself, holds back. Okay, he built the universe in 7 days for us, and he withdrew so that we could be creative and so forth. And now we're building the Mishkan, the holy space for God, and and so we have holy space, but we have holy time also. So we kind of shrink ourselves on Shabbat to recognize God, there God's holy presence is dominant, and we stop being creative. So it's, like two sides of the same coin, the universe and the sanctuary. are complementary.
Yes, thank you. And we'll get to that too. I have this feeling that people read ahead. That's wonderful. Let's find out what Martin Buber has to offer. Pardon me, which is this quote from Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk, okay? And I'm sorry, I'm not remembering your name.
Bill.
Yes, number 4.
Where is the dwelling of God? This was the question with which Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk surprised a number of learned people who happened to be visiting him. They laughed at him. What a thing to ask. Is not the whole world full of God's glory? Then he answered his own question. God dwells wherever we let God in.
Right, right. And let's go on to Midrash number 5, Midrash Rabbah.
They shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within them. There was once a king who had an only daughter, and one of the kings came and married her. When her husband wished to return to his country, her father said to him, "My daughter, whose hand I have given you, is my only child. I cannot part with her. Neither can I say to you, do not take her, for she is your wife. This one favor, however, I ask of you. Wherever you go to live, prepare a chamber for me, that I may dwell with you, for I cannot leave my daughter." In the same way, God said to Israel, "I have given you the Torah. I cannot part with her, and I also cannot tell you not to take her. For this I request of you, wherever you go, make for me a house wherein I may dwell."
Isn't that a precious story?
Yeah, it's a-
Really? You know, wherever. I'm sorry? Yes, yes, it's beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, let's talk about creation.
Probably two meaningless things to say, but analogies that I've been thinking of as we've been talking. I mean, the air is all around us. Every once in a while, we'll create a balloon to capture a portion of it and benefit from that, or a parachute to benefit from it. But ultimately, it returns to everything. And yet, for a period, we can coalesce it. It can dwell amongst us, that little bit of air, and it's a value at that point. And then also, I think in this last reading, you know, we take thoughts and ideas and put them down on paper with letters or in a scroll. And in a way, we have brought it to dwell amongst us, but it hasn't, those ideas haven't disappeared from the larger world as well. So I think you can have it both with you and around you in a way at the same time.
Sure, for sure. And think about when that balloon is blown up. Who blows up that balloon?
Right. So right, you're a participant.
Me
in it.
too,
Yeah.
right? And when we pray the Elohai Neshama prayer each morning, the soul that you have given me is a pure one. You breathed it into me, right?
So the breath of man,
Yep,
not just the breath of God.
right. Okay, from the legends of the Bible. And and so basically Louis Ginsburg collected many of these stories and legends and midrashim. And here's one that talks about God as creating the universe and the comparison with us building the the Mishkan. Okay.
God was indeed anxious to have a sanctuary erected to him. It was the condition on which he led them out of Egypt. Yea, in a certain sense, the existence of all the world depended on the construction of the sanctuary. When the sanctuary had been erected, the world stood firmly founded, whereas until then, it had always been swaying hither and thither. Hence, the tabernacle in its separate parts also corresponded to the creations of the 6 days. The 2 tablets in the ark corresponded to the heavens and the earth that had been created on the first day. As the firmament had been created on the second day to divide the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above, so there was a curtain in the tabernacle to divide between the holy and the most holy.
Excuse me, one second.
Sure.
We have the tablets of the covenant, right? And that's given at Sinai, right? The first two things. And then there's the parochet, right? That's what he's talking about now, that is behind or in front of the tablets. So, you know, look inside the sanctuary, right? And you've got the ark that's holding them. but with the parochet in the front, and that's the Holy of, basically symbolizes the Holy of Holies. And, okay, all right, go on.
As God created the great sea on the third day, so did he appoint the laver
The laver or the laver, that's the hand washing station, okay?
in the sanctuary to symbolize it. And as he had on that day destined the plant kingdom as nourishment for men, so did he now require a table with bread in the tabernacle.
And that's the table of the showbread, right, with 12 loaves of bread.
The candlestick in the tabernacle corresponded to the two luminous bodies, the sun and the moon, created on the fourth day. And of the 7 branches of the candlestick corresponded to the 7 planets, the sun, Venus, Mercury, the moon, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. Corresponding to the birds created on the 5th day, the tabernacle contained the cherubim that had wings like birds. And on the 6th day, the last day of creation, man had been created in the image of God to glorify his creator. And likewise was the high priest anointed to minister in the tabernacle before his Lord and Creator.
So very quickly, I apologize for not having these available to you to make copies of for everyone.
Rabbi, did you
Yes.
know last night, unfortunately,
Yes.
not including about the planet
Yes.
line, yeah, Larry kept looking out the window last night. Right? Clouds apart.
Right,
They never-
right. So last night was the parade of planets, right?
You think you think it was corresponding because it was Rosh Hashanah also?
I think it was visible because it was Rosh Hashanah, because there was no big moon.
That's
So
it. To block the.
No, not a lot of
There were
shine.
clouds.
Yeah.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
So on the piece that I just handed out, yes,
I just got this with the 12 loaves of bread in the desert. And we didn't have any.
the 12, he connected it to the vegetation. And so wheat is seen as part of the vegetation, which was then turned into the loaves of bread for the table for the showbread.
But your
Oh,
practical
oh.
question is, where did they have wheat to make the bread?
No, that to actually to make the bread when they cook the bread.
Uh-huh.
the same thing.
So
Make it from
why that instruction if they couldn't do it?
You're right about that. And as the expression says, God only knows. Okay. All right. Let's, in this little blue packet is a, sorry, a reading from Rabbi Arthur Green, but on the next page is the full Devar Torah from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs entitled The Architecture of Holiness. And on the second page of that, or of his, let's see, sorry. So there's the front page, his essay begins, and then on the third page, so to speak, of the packet, is a section that's bolded. And so I'll read that one in the words of Rabbi Sachs. Torah commentators, especially the late Nechama Leibowitz, have drawn attention to the way the terminology of the construction of the tabernacle is the same as that used to describe God's creation of the universe. The tabernacle was, in other words, a microcosmos, a symbolic reminder of the world God made. The fact that the divine presence rested within it was not meant to suggest that God is here, not there, in this place, not that. It was meant to signal powerfully and palpably that God exists throughout the cosmos. It was a man-made structure to mirror and focus attention on the divinely created universe. It was in space what Shabbat is in time, a reminder of creation. And as I read this, I think about all the models that perhaps maybe some of you or some of your children or grandchildren have made that show the three-dimensional planets as they hang in the solar system. And so think of the solar system, right, as this model of the universe, and then the sanctuary space as this model of that universe. It's just the idea is that I think it all goes back to the question, really, can we put God in such a small place? And the answer is yes, because God is in every place. And this is when we come together in this place and at this time, this is when we are feeling God's presence. But also, as we have said, that yes, it's all well and good, but there are so many other opportunities to feel God's presence and to recognize God's presence in our lives. Let's go back to the white handout for number 7 from Sefer HaChinuch, which was a rabbinic text which systematically discusses the 613 commandments of Torah. And right. And that number 7, could you read that?
Sure. Know, my child, that any commandment that God requires of humankind comes only out of God's desire to benefit us. God's command to build the tabernacle for us to offer therein our prayers and sacrifices comes not out of God's need to dwell in an earthly dwelling among humankind, but rather out of God's awareness that we need train our own selves.
Stops there. So what do we need to train our own selves? What does that mean? God's command to build the tabernacle for us to offer therein our prayers and sacrifices. So basically, from his perspective, the author's perspective, God, and it will be, I mean, build this, and then this is where you'll come to offer your sacrifices. And as time goes on, this is where we will come to pray, right? And comes not out of God's need to dwell in an earthly dwelling among humankind, but rather out of God's awareness that we need to train our own selves to be aware of the presence of God. And the idea of the sacrifices and the offerings, that's just so time bound, right? From a certain point in time, as someone had mentioned, as Sheila had mentioned too, this is what the other folks were doing. Maimonides talks about this, why does God have us give offerings and make sacrifices? And the idea is this is what is being done by our neighbors. And so this is what we have we know from this. And so now we're going to do this, but within a Jewish context. And as time goes on, we're going to need it less and less. And we certainly find this out when the idea of making a central sanctuary is fulfilled, and then that sanctuary is destroyed. But wait, how are we going to offer our sacrifices? And when one of the rabbis, it's escaping me, I was walking with his disciple, and he asks him that question, looking down at the smoke rising from the destruction of the temple. The rabbi says, Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, right? Sorry about that. He says, God doesn't need our sacrifices for atonement. God wants our acts of loving kindness and our good deeds. And we come to then create this rabbinic practice of Judaism, which is truly what we practice today. Our prayers based on, the idea, the timing of the sacrifices, et cetera, et cetera. But our Jewish practice is this, and then taken from generation to generation, from century to century, to create a living Judaism that we can carry with us. It's a living Torah that we can carry with us. And no matter where we go, God is with us in the process. Yes.
I was just gonna say that I think it's an ongoing struggle, so to speak. I mean, as I read the paragraph about connecting it to creation, I can't help but think to myself that some of it feels like a stretch. Or the other side of the coin is maybe I just don't get it yet.
Yes.
But I think that kind of is emblematic of the whole struggle, because we're saying that we want a way of relating to God as an external absolute, if you will, that the mitzvot have meaning in terms of training us up to be mentioned. And I have a number of friends who are, I'll just say secular, if you want to use that word, who say correctly enough, you know, I'm a good person, I don't need any of that. And then I might try and emphasize, well, you don't need any of that, but part of what informs the way you think of yourself as a good person is that anyway. And they'll be like, well, maybe, but maybe not. I still don't need any of that. And then I'll go a little bit further and I'll say, that's pretty much what Hitler and Stalin said. And look how well that came out. And I still usually end up hearing, well, I'm not Hitler or Stalin, so I don't need any of that. I think whether that person realizes they need any of that or not, we kind of all need any of that. And, you know, we're all struggling in different ways. Some of us just happen to be struggling together in a place like this, and others maybe somewhere else. But, you know, maybe that's, we always say that we're commanded to love God, right? That's the Shema. And we say that God loves us, and maybe that's the way God loves us, by giving us a way of expressing some connection that we yearn for.
All right, thank you. Beautiful, yes.
I like to say we're looking for some grandiose sort of concrete, very overwhelming thing that will connect us with God. I think God is present in the smallest microorganisms as well, looking into a microscope. Not that God is the amoeba or whatever microscopic organ it be, but he governs what happens among them. So I think, I've been asking kind of question, I think relates to what he said, that do we need this, do we not? What I say is, whatever we have, the ritual, the rabbis, all of our study and so forth, is not complete, but without it, we have nothing.
It's a process. It's definitely a process, yes.
This,
We have nothing.
it seems like we're looking at nation
No
building
matter what
here.
the struggle is,
We
we
were
need
a
it.
group of disparate
Maybe it's
people.
people
We
in the
needed to
book
come
that
together
was that
in a
dedication.
stronger nation
I don't know about the Greeks
format.
or
And
the
so we looked
philosophers of
around
the
and how do
ancient
other
world,
nations exist, and
but
we wanted to mirror
maybe
that
God
later.
What
history.
is that struggle?
We wanted
No, it's painful. at
kings,
times,
because
so
also
it's
other nations had kings,
contradictory.
and we wanted to be like them. And so there was a time in the history, and we were talking about this a little bit, not where you were talking, that there was a time the Jewish people represented a powerful nation, like other nations. We had land, we had conquests and the like. And during that time, we wanted to look like other nations. Once we got dispersed, we realized maybe, or over time, that we're not going to be like other nations. We're going to be small, we're going to be dispersed. And that's when a nation building through mitzvot and through rabbinic Judaism made us a rather unique nation, a broad, dispersed nation connected through shared practices and rituals, but not necessarily, although now we have state of Israel, not necessarily nation like other nations. And so I see this, the Mishkan, clearly being let's all get together, let's become a nation. We're not just walking through the desert on our own, and we're not reaching God only on our own. We're reaching it as a community.
For sure, for sure. This is it's a physical representation of our place to come to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, here in Sansino, they put it as these things become an external sign of love and gratitude and surrender to God's will. That's what we do.
Yes. Many do. Yes.
No, the building of the Mishkan also makes me think about the fact that some of our commandments, you can only do communally. You know, maybe the best example is if you need to take cottage, you cannot do it alone. So I think that's a very important aspect of Judaism. That yes, in the morning, you can say your morning prayers by yourself, no problem. But other occasions, obviously holidays, things like that, Shabbos. I mean, you can still daven at home alone on Shabbos, but it's always better to be able to hear the Torah, you know, right?
Yeah, if you're gone alone, you have to leave certain things out, like the cottage, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you need a minion for certain things,
Exactly.
right? The
And-
power
and-
of community. And Ivan,
Yeah, Rabbi Sachs makes an interesting point that the temple, the actual temple that we lost after Solomon, didn't survive. But the Mishkan, in the sense that it was the forerunner of the synagogue, did survive. You know, in other words, we lost the temple, we lost our land, and so on, but we developed the concept of the synagogue that resembles the Mishkan. And that, you know, that local place to worship and to find holiness and so forth was, you know, a trademark of our existence for 2,000 years and after.
for sure, for sure. Thank you, thank you. Let's look at number 9, where Rashi is commenting on Exodus 25:8. There, the text says, "Va'asu li mikdash," and let them make me a sanctuary. Va'asu lishmi beit mikdusha, let them make to the glory of my name a place of holiness. So basically, what the Malbim says, okay, to the glory of my name, that my name should be wherever we see a sanctuary, this is made to the glory of God's name. This is our way of expressing our connection to God in a physical way. The Malbim writes, each one of us needs to build God a tabernacle in the recesses of our hearts by preparing oneself to become a sanctuary for God and a place for the dwelling of God's glory. And this little piece at the end here, which I think I will end with for now. Okay,
You gonna sing?
go ahead.
It also says somewhere else, not in your handouts, as if God needs a place to live in or to dwell in.
Yes,
So.
yes,
there's
that's
that
right.
Too.
That's right. So there's, and where is that? And so that's a great segue. So the idea is that God can be in a sanctuary space, a place. God could be, oh, I read this beautiful commentary a couple of weeks ago that the presence that for this person, the idea of God's presence being everywhere, even in the tiniest amoeba, even in the tiniest cell, there's the space between the this and the that, and God is present there. The idea of a table being completely and utterly solid, not quite. We call it solid, but there's still space between the cells, and God's presence is even there.
Right.
God's presence is in a thorn bush that doesn't burn up. God's presence is on a mountain that's covered with flame that doesn't burn up, that Moses can ascend and then descend, right? And God's presence is here within us. And this goes like this. Oh Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. One more time. Oh Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Shabbat shalom.